Hello everyone, welcome. So we are now at the end of October and I just love this time of year so much. And along with doing all of the fall themed activities, I also really love reading eerie, sometimes scary or gothic books during this time of year because it feels like the perfect time to read them. So today I decided to put together my list of recommendations of eerie, haunting books that are perfect for this season and just perfect for the fall. These books won't necessarily keep you up in the middle of the night. Some of them might, depends on the types of things you're afraid of, but they're just a bit more disturbing and haunting and eerie, so that's the vibe that I was kind of going for with these. Before we get into the rest of the video, I just want to remind you all that my film and TV journal, the Clockwork Reader Film and TV Journal, is available in the description box down below. You can order it from any of your favorite bookstores or just follow the links if you don't know where to order it from. This would also make a perfect gift for the upcoming holiday season. If you're looking for a gift for a movie or TV show lover, this would be great. So don't forget to check this out in the description box below, as well as the link for the reading journal, which is always also linked down below. And second, I also want to thank today's sponsor for this video, which is Milanote. Milanote is a tool to help you organize your creative projects. It's a workspace that allows you both freedom and structure to help you build and plan your creative work. Whether you're plotting out a novel or just planning out your week, Milanote has hundreds of built-in templates you can choose from to help you throughout your creative process. One of my personal favorite ways to use Milanote is to create mood boards, especially for books that I'm reading. I recently read and loved the book Woman Eating, which I'll talk about later in the video, and I decided to use Milanote to make a mood board for it. I was really inspired by the story and the cover art, so I made a few boards inspired by the book. First, I created a general mood board with some photos that captured the aesthetic. I also included a few notes with some of my favorite quotes from the book, and it was all super easy thanks to their built-in templates. I also included another board with some more of my favorite quotes because there were just so many passages I loved in the story. And I also made one more board with some extra book recommendations of books similar to Woman Eating, including books I personally recommend and ones I want to read. So if you're interested in trying it out for your own creative projects, Milanote is available for free with no time limit, and you can sign up using the link in my description. So once again, thank you so much to Milanote for sponsoring this video, and without any further ado, let's get into my book recommendations. Okay, so I believe that I have 9 books on this list. I feel like every time I do one of these recommendations, I'm always afraid that I've left something out. I probably have left something out, but these are just the ones that came to mind, the top of my head, some of the ones I've read most recently. First up, I've got to mention a classic, which you could not make a list of eerie or gothic fall-themed recommendations and not include this book on it, I think. And that is, of course, The Picture of Dorian Gray. This book is the epitome of eerie and haunting and gothic, and I absolutely love it. If you still haven't read this book, I highly recommend picking it up this fall season. It's such a quintessentially fall book, and it's also pretty haunting. It's the type of book that's perfect to just sit there to read with a really aesthetic fall-themed setup as you sip your tea and just cozy up for this dark, disturbing story. So yeah, highly recommend. Easily my favorite classic of all time. So again, if you haven't read it, you absolutely need to. Okay, keeping on theme with my classic recommendations, the next one I absolutely have to mention is one of my all-time favorite classics as well, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I've talked about this book countless times. I've talked about the comparison to Verity by Colleen Hoover and how I think that no one should read that and everyone should just read this instead. And I still stand by that because this book is dark, it is disturbing, it's very haunting because it's ghostly, there's like an actual ghost in the story. If you happen to not know what it's about, it's the story of this young woman who meets this older man and falls head over heels in love with him, and they get married very quickly, and she moves into his house only to find out that she and the house are being haunted by the ghost of his dead wife named Rebecca. So that's kind of what the story is about. You don't really need to know anything else before you read it. But yeah, again, couldn't make this list without recommending this one. Picture of Dorian Gray and Rebecca are definitely my go-to fall classic recommendations. I think they're perfect. Frankenstein would also be a good recommendation, but personally I really enjoy these two. Okay, next up we have my 2 vampire recommendations. I've been really getting back into vampires lately. Back when I had my whole Twilight phase in middle school, I was very into vampires, as many of us were, and I feel like I really miss vampire content. I feel like I haven't watched or read anything vampire themed in quite some time, and that's not to say that there isn't any content, it's just that I haven't been engaging with it, and I don't really know why, but I really miss it, and lately I've been trying to get back into vampire things. So these are my 2 vampire book recommendations of the moment, and first up is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Ignore this peeled sticker on here, I need to fix that and take that off, just don't look at it. But this is a retelling of Dracula from the perspective of Dracula's wives, and it's beautiful. This book is disturbing, it's dark, it's difficult to read at times, but it's fantastic. It has beautiful prose, it's a very gothic story as well. So again, just be sure to look up content warnings. I think for all of these, to be honest with you, there's some difficult stuff and difficult content in most of these books, so just be aware. But yeah, if you are into vampires, if you're into Dracula, which I haven't even read the original Dracula yet, I really need to, but after reading this, I definitely plan to. This was just fantastic, such a great read, and I think it's perfect for fall. The next vampire book I have to recommend is the book I read most recently, actually, and this has become, I think, one of my new all-time favorites. I don't know if I can call it an all-time favorite, but in terms of like lit fic, this is easily one of my favorites, if not my actual favorite, and that is Woman Eating. So this book is a little bit different. Like I mentioned, it's actually more like lit fic, but with a little bit of a fantasy element to it because the main character is a vampire. It's essentially about this 20-something-year-old woman who has just recently moved out and is living away from her mother for the first time, and she is also a vampire, so she's dealing with the struggle of being on her own and being alone in the world in more ways than one, while also trying to feed herself, and she doesn't want to kill people because she believes herself to be a monster. So there's layers and layers of metaphor here, and I eat that up, pun intended. But this book, oh my god, when I first talked about it, I described it as perfect for distressed 20-somethings with mommy issues and eating disorders, and that's exactly, like, that's who this book is for. That's the demographic. It's great, okay? Loved it. Highly, highly recommend. It's disturbing, it's dark, not as scary as maybe some of the other books that I'd have to recommend. Not that any of these are all that scary, but just more psychological, more disturbing in that sense. So loved it, highly recommend. Everyone needs to read it. Okay, the next recommendation that I have is probably my favorite book on this list. I want to say that it's my favorite, but it's hard to decide because I love so many of these books, but this is probably my favorite one, and that is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. I've talked about this book nonstop. I've recommended it constantly since I read it last year because I just think it's that good. I think this book is deeply misunderstood. I think that this book is also deeply misrepresented. Sometimes I will read reviews of this book and people are just, their reviews are just so off the wall. It's like they didn't read the book at all. It's shocking to me the amount of people who will complain about the gothic horror elements in this gothic horror book and call it problematic when it's just depicting those things and not endorsing those things. Anyway, that's a whole other rant. If you're interested in reading an actual gothic horror novel with lots of disturbing elements throughout it, but it's also extremely beautifully written. The prose in this book is unreal. I love Ava Reid's writing so much. Truly one of my favorite authors of all time now. An in-depth exploration of trauma, family trauma, and family dynamics with a fairy tale, folktale-like setting. But it's basically about our main character named Marlenchen, who is the youngest of these three sisters who are witches, and they all live with their horrible, abusive father, but it's all from her perspective, so we're really in her head a lot of the time. But again, cannot emphasize enough how much this book just has resonated with me and stuck with me since I've read it. Love, love, love the writing, love the characters, love everything about this story. It's unlike anything I've ever read, and I adore it. But again, as always, content warnings, it's disturbing, it's graphic, it can be very intense at times, but if that's something you're up for, you have to read it. Now, keeping on theme with Ava Reid books, recently, their most recent release is A Study in Drowning, which is my next recommendation because this book is also eerie and haunting in its own way. This one is a YA dark academia novel, so it's a little bit different than some of the other ones that I've recommended, but it's also very like folklore and fairy tale based, and a lot of those elements in the story and the atmosphere of it all together I think is just perfect for fall. This book follows our main character Effie, who is an architecture student, and she ends up working on this project to help design the house for one of her favorite authors who recently passed away. It's a story about stories in a lot of ways, and as you all know, those are like my favorite books of all time, so you can see why I would really like this one. There's a lot of mystery shrouded within the authorship of this author's work and whether or not he actually was the author. So it's very much a story about stories and about whose stories we choose to tell and how we choose to tell those stories. So I just really love that question. So that's one of the main like themes of the book. But in terms of atmosphere, like I said, it's definitely a bit more fairy tale like, folktale like, but a darker folktale, kind of like a grim fairy tale, you know, which is why I would put it on this list. It's not your lighthearted, happy, fun fairy tale. It's definitely more disturbing. It's definitely a bit more intense, but I just really love the stories within this story. They felt real. And honestly, I would love if we could get a book about the Fairy King, like the book that we have in here. I want that actual book published because I know it would be so good. It'd be really dark and it would fit perfectly on this list. And I would eat it up. So yeah, highly recommend Study in Drowning, new release this year that I think is fantastic, and a YA that is absolutely worth the hype. Okay, the next book I have to recommend is another favorite read of this year, and that is, of course, The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chokshi. I'm obsessed with this book. I've talked about it so many times at this point since I read it at the beginning of this year because I can't get enough of it. It's just fantastic. This book is difficult to describe, but basically it follows two different perspectives. One of this man called the bridegroom who meets this woman and he falls in love with her and he wants to marry her, and then they get engaged and things are progressing really quickly and he's learning about her slowly as we read through his perspective. And then the other perspective we get is that of Indigo, the woman that he's in love with, her childhood best friend. So we get her perspective as she tells their story from when they were kids. So the time that that's set in is when they were like in high school, so it's not present day. And so basically from each perspective, we're learning about Indigo. So yeah, that's kind of the setup of the story, but really this is a book about that intense, codependent, toxic female friendship that people have in childhood, and that line between platonic and romantic love that you can have for somebody you consider such a close friend, especially in youth like that. Words I keep using over and over again are haunting, but it's very haunting. It's also enchanting, beautifully written, beautiful, beautiful prose again. I love a good gothic story with beautiful prose. That's like one of my favorite things ever in a book. So you'll notice that as a common thread throughout all of my recommendations. But yeah, cannot get enough of this book. If you still haven't read it, this is the perfect time to finally pick it up. Okay, my next recommendation is technically a collection of short stories, but I am specifically going to recommend one story from this collection, and that is of course Her Body and Other Parties. This book I've talked about countless times as well. You all know how much I love it, how much I love Carmen Maria Machado as an author. She's phenomenal. But specifically, I recommend the Husband Stitch, which is, I think, the first story in this one. Read this one, okay? Read this one, it's so good. I mean, really, you can read any of the stories in here. I'd recommend the whole thing. I have many times. But if you're looking for something that has that fall vibe, The Husband Stitch is the story you need to read. It's just a classic to me, and it's so, so perfect. So yeah, highly, highly recommend if you're looking for something just like a little bit shorter that you just want to read quickly. Pick this book up, read the first story. It's not very long at all, and it'll get you thinking. It's fantastic. Okay, and then lastly, my final recommendation is a book that I also deeply, deeply love. One of my all-time favorites now ever since I read it last year, and one that I'm genuinely thinking of rereading this year because I miss it. I just feel like I need to read it again. But that is, of course, If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. Is it really fall if you're not reading about our favorite group of tragic Shakespearean thespians? It is mysterious, it's dark, it's thrilling, it will keep you on the edge of your seat, it'll break your heart and put it back together. It's just everything I could ever want in a book. I know that people really hype this book up, but I promise you, this one is actually worth it. It's just perfect. Okay, it's a perfect book. This one I definitely consider less gothic than some of the other ones. It's a dark academia novel, so it's a little less gory maybe, but there's still some gore in this one as well. But it's more like a thriller in that sense. So if you're looking for something that's a bit more suspenseful rather than scary, this would for sure be my recommendation because it's just, oh my god, I just need everyone to read it. Like, I know most people have probably already read it, like most of you here. Most of the audience here has probably read it, but if you haven't, I need every last one of you to pick this one up, okay? It's perfect. You'll love it. I promise. It'll make you cry. It'll make you feel so many things. Just do it. Do yourself a favor. Read If We Were Villains. But there you all have it. That is it for my list of recommendations. But if you have any other fall recommendations for me, any other books you think would fit well on this list, please feel free to give me your recommendations down below. I always love looking at your recs. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, all my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye!